Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear participants. Welcome to this session of textual study of the Quran. Today we will start off with verse 243 of Surah Baqarah, and from here actually you would realize that this is the last section of the surah, and it is in this section that the surah reaches its culmination. And it's actually the fourth section. The last section is the conclusion, which will follow this fourth section. And in it, the topic of jihad and infaq is brought to a completion, which could not be completed in the previous section because of some on-the-spot questions that had been raised and they were answered. So we will find this reaching its completion, and then we will look at some of the more important details that arise as we study these verses. So let's start off. ألم تر إلى الذين خرجوا من ديارهم وهم ألوف حذر الموت فقال اللهم الله موتوا ثم أحياهم إن الله لذو فضل على الناس ولكن أكثر الناس لا يشكرون. These issues had arisen because of your questions about jihad and infaq. Believers, their directives should not weigh heavily upon you. Did you not see the people who were in thousands and who fled their homes because of the fear of death? At this God said to them, live like the dead. They remain in this state for years. Then God brought them back to life again. Surely God is gracious to people, but most among people are not grateful to Him. So the first thing that might strike you is the nature of the address. You can see it starts off with Alam Tara, and this is a singular address, but when the Quran addresses plural entities in this singular way, the purpose is to address each and every addressee in an individual way. So the word Alam Tara, although it might seem to be a singular address, in essence it is a plural address. The part of history which is related here has to be understood in its background, and as far as the incident which is described here is concerned, it relates to the Philistines who had attacked the Israelites and had massacred them and took away the ark from them, which held the status of a qibla. We know that the ark which they had the status of the qibla, and they used to pray by pointing towards and facing towards that ark. So the Bible actually describes this incident in which the Philistines had fought the Israelites. Remember, the Israelites were in the land of Canaan, and the Philistines had fought them. And the way this is mentioned in the Bible, I'm just going to read out the excerpt. So it says, so the Philistines fought, and Israelites were defeated, and every man fled to his tent. The slaughter was very great. Israel lost 30,000 foot soldiers. The ark of God was captured. So the details of this incident, as described in the 7th and 11th chapters of the first book of Samuel, actually show that although the Israelites were 300,000, so they were 300,000 in number, they were not able to face the Philistines because they were morally weak and were in a state of political turmoil and discord. They were forced to vacate their cities from Ekron to Gath. So these are areas that they had to vacate because of this attack of the Philistines. And it is known that from the Bible, as we shall see, that this whole era actually lasted for about 20 years, as the Bible is say. But before we go on to the how the Bible describes the extent of this era, we need to understand the word mutu. So the word which is in the imperative form says die, and this word actually just describes the humiliation of the Israelites as a nation. When God says mutu, die, it doesn't mean that physical death that we often know of. The law of the Almighty regarding the progeny of Abraham is that they would be punished in this world for their crimes. So when instead of being steadfast on their faith and doing pious deeds, if they cling to immoral practices and they are coward and they violate the covenant with the Almighty then inflicts on them humiliation and disgrace. And as I said, that in the first book of Samuel, the Israelites faced the situation for 20 years. So the Bible says it was a long time. 20 years in all, that the ark remained in Kiriath Jearim, and all the people of Israel mourned and sought after the Lord. So this was something which is clearly a very big loss for them. And as you can see, the Quran then says after that, فَقَالَ اللَّهُمُ اللَّهُ مُوتُ. So we will study those verses and see how the Almighty actually then gave them that life once again. So going back to the translation, so it says فَقَالَ اللَّهُمُ اللَّهُ مُوتُ ثُمَّ أَحْيَاهُم. So as I said, this death which is called here is not the death that we face in a physical form, but it's like that morally decrepit state that they were facing. And then it says summa ahyahum. So this was like being given new life, and this new life was given to them in accordance with the law referred to earlier, which relates to Abraham's progeny. So when the Israelites repented and once again professed faith, the Almighty rewarded them by reviving them in their collective capacity and granting them honor and domination over their enemies. And the Bible actually records this detail as well. So, referring to the Bible, it says, so Samuel said to all the Israelites, if you are returning to the Lord with all your hearts, and then rid yourselves of the foreign gods and the Ashtoreths, and commit yourselves to the Lord and serve him only, and he will deliver you out of the hand of the Philistines. So the Israelites put away their Baals and Ashtoreths and served the Lord only. So as you can see, that they had become incriminated with various forms of polytheism, and they had taken to polytheism. But once they repented, the Almighty once again restored their dominance. And the Philistines were subdued and did not invade the Israelite territory once again. And throughout the prophet Samuel's lifetime, the hand of God was against the Philistines, and we can see that the various towns they were given to them. And it's recorded in the first book of Samuel, chapter 7, verses 13 to 14. It says, so the Philistines were subdued and did not invade the Israelite territory again. Throughout Samuel's lifetime, the hand of Lord was against the Philistines. The towns from Ekron to Gath that the Philistines had captured from Israel were restored to her, and Israel delivered the neighboring territory from the power of the Philistines. So you can see how, in the times of the prophet Samuel, this was once again given back to them. Now, moving on to the next verse, it says, وَقَاتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّ اللَّهَ سَمِيعٌ عَلِيمٌ. Believers, learn a lesson from this and wage war for the cause of God, and fully bear in mind that God hears all and knows all. Who is it that will give? So that is the next verse. مَنْ ذَا الَّذِي يُقْرِضُ اللَّهَ قَرْضًا حَسَنًا فَيُضَاعِفَهُ لَهُ أَضْعَافًا كَثِيرًا وَاللَّهُ يَقْبِضُ وَيَبْسُطُ وَإِلَيْهِ تُرْجَعُونَ. Believers, learn a lesson from this. So basically, what has happened here is that Ishmaelites, who in those times had been given this responsibility, they are reminded of the history of the Israelites, and they are told that, look, you derive inspiration from those Israelites who, once they were subdued, had regained that the lost territory because they had repented. So now they are being told that if you fight for the cause of God, be inspired from them, and for this purpose, this is something which the Quran often says, that مَنْ ذَا الَّذِي يُقْرِضُ اللَّهَ قَرْضًا حَسَنًا, that for the purpose of jihad, you lend a goodly loan to God, which means that you spend for the cause of God for this war that is at stake. And in accordance with his promise with the progeny of Abraham, God will bless them and grant them sovereignty and success. And these verses also actually sound a warning that if the Ishmaelites now fear death and prefer humiliation and disgrace for themselves, they will once again face this death in accordance with the same promise. So it was essential for them that they realize that as far as the Quran is concerned, they must not be any, the Quran has given them this clear lesson that they should not in any way turn their backs, and they should draw inspiration to what had happened to Israel. So they were outnumbered, they were in the state of spiritual death for 20 years, but then they repented, and once again they found favor with God. So it's like making them look at their predecessors and learn and draw a lesson from their history. ألم تر إلى الملأ من بني إسرائيل من بعد موسى إذ قالوا لنبي لهم لمهمس لنا ملكا نقاتل في سبيل الله قال هل عسيتم إن كتب عليكم القتال ألا تقاتلوا قالوا وما لنا ألا نقاتل في سبيل الله وَقَدْ أُخْرِجْنَا مِنْ دِيَارِنَا وَأَبْنَائِنَا فَلَمَّا كُتِبَ عَلَيْهِمُ الْقِتَالُ تَوَلَّوْا إِلَّا قَلِيلًا مِّنْهُمْ وَاللَّهُ عَلِيمٌ بِالظَّالِمِينَ. Did you not see the leaders of the Israelites after Moses when they asked a prophet of theirs, appoint a king for us, so that at his bidding we can wage war for the cause of God? So this is the same incident which was, referred to earlier on in a very brief way, and now it is being said in a very detailed way. And the Bible points out that the prophet here, the word here is says Nabi. Their Nabi was Samuel, and Samuel they asked Samuel that they should be given a king, they should be appointed a king over themselves, someone should be appointed a king amongst themselves, over themselves, so that this would be something which might make them dominate the rest of the world or the rest of the people around them. So since the incident here has been discussed from another angle, it has not been mentioned that the Almighty did not approve of the demand from the Israelites that a king be appointed over them. But it is evident from the Bible that the Almighty did not approve of this and asked them to not put on the yoke of slavery from their own hands. So basically, these people were the ones who had asked their own prophet that a king should be appointed. And although the Quran does not describe God's displeasure, but we know from the Bible that God actually discouraged them and said that, well, if someone is appointed as a king, you'll become his slaves, and he'll ask you to do all sorts of things that relate to servitude, and then you'll regret. But they insisted. So this particular aspect is mentioned in the Bible, and let me just read some parts of that excerpt. So it's from Samuel 1 and chapter number 8, verses 6 to 20. But when they said, God, give us a king to lead us, this displeased Samuel. So he prayed to the Lord, and the Lord told him, listen to all that the people are saying to you. It is not you that they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king. Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking him for a king. So basically, at their demand, when they were asked for the king, God said, well, I am your king, I am there for you. And they still wanted someone in human form to be appointed as their king. So this was what the king said, the king who will reign over you will do. He will take your sons and make them serve with his chariots and horses. So all that Samuel is now telling them, that if you insist on that a king be appointed over you, then you will be really you'll really regret what has happened, because he is going to really put you to task. And they will run in front of his chariots. Some he will assign to be commanders in thousands and commanders of fifties, and others to plow his ground and reap his harvest, and still others to make weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. So the sons would be put in the charge of the army, and the daughters would be appointed to make perfumes, and they would be appointed as cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive groves and give them to his attendants. So this is all the description that Samuel is telling them, that if they insist on that a king be appointed over them, then this is how things will take shape. He will take a tenth of your grain and of your vintage and give it to his officials and attendants, your men servants and maid servants, and the best of your cattle and donkeys he will take for his own use. He will take a tenth of your flocks, and you yourselves will become his slaves. When the day comes, you will cry out for relief from the king you have chosen, and the Lord will not answer you in that day. But the people refused to listen to Samuel. So this is the important thing, that in spite of this big speech that Samuel made before them, that they should not go for a king, and he described how they will humiliate their own sons and their daughters. They still insisted. So no, they said, we want a king over us. Then we will be like all other nations, with a king to lead us and to go out before us and fight our battles. So they insisted, and we know that once they insisted, God actually, this is like God giving way to them and said, okay, since this is your wish, and that shall be granted, and then you'll regret what you had actually wished for. So, وَقَالَ لَهُمْ نَبِيُّهُمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ قَدْ بَعَثَ لَكُمْ طَالُوتَ مَلِكًا قَالُوا أَنَّا يَكُونُ لَهُ الْمُلْكُ عَلَيْنَا وَنَحْنُ أَحَقُّ بِالْمُلْكِ مِنْهُ وَلَمْ يُؤْتَ سَعَةً مِنَ الْمَالِ قال إن الله اصطفاه عليكم وزاده بسطة في العلم والجسم Wallahu yu'ti mulkahu man yasha. Wallahu wasi'un alim. And at this demand of theirs, their prophet told them, God has appointed Talut as your king. So Talut is the person which we know is called Saul in the Bible, and probably Talut is his one of his names that the Quran is mentioned here. So they replied, how can he be made king upon us when we are more deserving of it than him, and he is also not a rich person? The prophet replied, God has chosen him to rule over you, and for this purpose blessed him with great wisdom and physique. This is the kingdom of God, and God gives this kingdom in accordance with his wisdom to whomsoever he wills. So you observe matters through your own narrow vision, and God is munificent. He knows everything. So you can see how the Almighty has, discouraged them. He tried to his best, but they did not listen to him, and ultimately, Saul was appointed through Samuel, and therefore they were called upon to serve him. And once they were actually appointed, he was appointed, they did not like him, because it is known that he actually belonged to a tribe which was inferior to their own tribe, and to the Benjamin tribe, to be precise. And they were the tribe that they did not like at all. He was someone who did not stand well with them. But as far as Talut is concerned, we know that God blessed him with this physique and this wisdom, which is just referred to here. And in the book of Bible also, you'll find that his description is not very different. So it says in Samuel 1, chapter number 10, verse 23, and as he stood among the people, he was a head taller than any of the others. So you see, this is how they were told that as far as the objection is concerned, it was like a habit that had become so they had become so used to. And as I said, the reason for this was that Talut was from the Benjaminite tribe, and among the Israelite tribes, this was the smallest. And Talut was from a family which was of the lowliest stature in this tribe. Moreover, as is mentioned, as I've just said, he was also not a rich person. So the Quran says that he was not a rich person. And as you can see from the Bible, once again, the troublemakers said, how can this fellow save us? They despised him and brought him no gifts. But Saul kept silent. So Saul is the same as Talut. Saul is the Quran speaking of him as Talut. And in the Bible, is called Saul, as I just said. So basically, they did not accept him. First, they made this demand. And when the Almighty granted this demand and he appointed someone who was befitting for this purpose, he was well built, he was tall, he had this physique, and in those tribal times, having a tall physique was a big qualification for becoming a leader. And Quran says, "Zadahu bastatan fil ilmi wal jism." Not only he had the physique, he also had the knowledge and wisdom through which he could govern them. So this is how the Almighty has said that as far as the Quran is concerned, it is absolutely evident that these were the things that they were required to do. Okay, so it says, وَقَالَ لَهُمْ نَبِيُّهُمْ إِنَّ آيَةَ مُلْكِهِ أَنْ يَأْتِيَكُمُ التَّابُوتُ فِيهِ سَكِينَةٌ مِّن رَبِّكُمْ وَبَقِيَّةٌ مِّمَّا تَرَكَ آلُ مُوسَى وآل هارون لتحمله الملائكة إن في ذلك لآيات لكم إن كنتم مؤمنين. And their prophet further explained for them the portent means sign, the portent of him being appointed king by God would be that your ark will come back to you from the hands of your enemies, in which there always has remained for you great tranquility from your Lord, and in which there are relics which the progeny of Moses and Aaron have left behind for you. It will be borne by the angels. Surely in it is a great sign for you if you believe. So this sign of divine appointment, as we know it clearly that it was this which made news for them, that basically the sign that he is a divinely appointed person. Saul is someone who has been divinely appointed. The sign would be that the ark of God would come back to them. The Ark of the Covenant, and has been described. So this ark, as we know, was the one that the Philistines had snatched away from the Israelites, and this ark actually occupied the status of the Qibla. They would face this ark in the times of their wanderings, and they would, before being able to go and into the Canaan, and where later on we know that Solomon built their temple. It was this ark which was the substitute of the Qibla, and this ark, or this tabut, as the Quran has referred to here, it had remnants of Moses and Aaron, and we know that the Philistines had conquered them. So the Quran now says that the sign of his divine appointment would be that the ark that was snatched away from them, that was taken away from them, or the Philistines, would be returned to them. Tahmiluhul malaika, and it would be as if the angels are bringing it back and bearing it for you. So, as far as this ark is concerned, we have to understand that since their exodus from Egypt until the construction of the Baitul Maqdis, as I just said, which is the temple built by Solomon, they would place it with great care in their tabernacle and at a specific position between curtains, and would face it during their devotions and supplications. Now, their rabbis and their soothsayers would turn towards it for divine guidance, and it was this ark which was the greatest source of assurance for the Israelites in difficult times and calamities. So we know that relics of Moses and Aaron's and their families were added to it, and they were housed in that box. And this was something, of course, that we don't know the details of, but this is how we are told in the Quran. And this prediction, we know that it materialized word for word, and the Philistines placed the ark on a vehicle and pushed it over in the direction of the areas of the Israelites, probably because of becoming awe-stricken on the war measures which were adopted by Talut, or Saul, and the success he achieved in them. So when Talut actually fought with them, they became overawed, and they returned that ark. And the way that they returned their ark was they just consigned it to a chariot, and it was as if it was driven by angels, and it came back to the Israelites. And this vehicle had no guide or custodian, and was drawn by two oxen whose young ones had been detained in their homes, and it reached its destination. And obviously, this can only happen because of the help of the angels. I mean, they just placed that ark on those two oxen. It was something that was drawn by two oxen, and the rest was just left to God. And this happened that we know that this is how the book of Samuel actually records these details. So let me just look at some of the details which chapter 6, 7, and verses 7 to 13 of Samuel 1 record this. Now then, get a cart ready with 2 cows and have calved, which means that they have given birth and have never been yoked. Hitch the cows to the cart, but take their calves away and pen them up. Take the ark of the Lord and put it on the cart, and in a chest beside it, put the gold objects you are sending back to him as a guilt offering. Send it on its way, but keep watching it. So they did this. They took 2 such cows and hitched them to the cart and penned up their calves. They placed the ark of the Lord on the cart, and along it the chest containing the gold rats and the models of the tumors. Then the cows went straight up towards Beth Shemesh, keeping on the road and lowing all the way. They did not return to the right or to the left. The rulers of the Philistines followed them as far as the border of Beth Shemesh. Now the people of Beth Shemesh were harvesting their wheat in the valley, and when they looked up and saw the ark, they rejoiced at the sight. So the Bible, as you can see, clearly describes how this was returned to them, and this was a divine sign actually, that as far as the Quran is concerned, it has given this sign to them that this divine appointment would be that they would be given this, they would be returned this ark, and they would have this chance once again to rejoice at receiving it. So when the Israelites were deprived of this ark, their elders regarded it as an event which stripped them of their grandeur and glory. And the whole nation mourned this for almost 20 years. So there could not have been any better sign than this ark that could signify that the appointment of Talut was from God. Obvious in it were glad tidings that now that the Israelites have turned to God, they would also regain their lost glory, just as they had regained the ark. One thing that you might want to know here is that the biblical version in this regard is different from that of the Quran. So it says that the Philistines had placed the ark on the vehicle and pushed it towards the areas of Israelites before the appointment of Talut. So remember, the Quran is telling us that this cart on which this ark was placed would be a sign of divine appointment of Talut himself, and they would regain that ark. But if you look at the account of the Bible, you'll see that it says that the Philistines had placed the ark on the vehicle much before the appointment of Talut. But this version is refuted by other passages of the Bible itself. And we know that if this is true, then the Philistines had returned the ark just after 7 months, fearing its magical powers. Then there are passages in the Bible which are rendered meaningless. For example, if I take this passage, which is Samuel 1 and chapter number 7, verse 2, it says, "It was a long time, 20 years in all, that the ark remained at Kiriath Jearim, and all the people of Israel mourned and sought after the Lord." So you can see that this is, clearly, which is mentioned here, that if Kiriath Jearim was a territory of the Israelites and the ark was with them, then why did all the people of Israel mourn it? And what is the meaning of the words sought after the Lord? So we can clearly see that this is a discrepancy, and this could not have happened. And we know that scholars have pointed out that the book of Samuel has many contradictory passages in it, and it is difficult to differentiate the spurious from the right ones. And therefore, we know that from the study of the Quran, how the Quran has actually corrected certain passages in certain parts of the Bible, and which of course is something which is a blessing for us, because we now get to know the whole picture in its totality. فَلَمَّا فَصَلَ طَالُوتُ بِالْجُنُودِ. So, okay, before I go on, because this is now one of the generals of Saul, whose attack is now being described, and we'll have some more things to say about it. But before we move on, if you have any questions regarding what we have studied up till now, please raise them.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. Shaban Ansari, please go ahead.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम।
Walaikum assalam.
डॉक्टर साहब, मैंने ये पूछना था कि जिस तरह बनी इसराइल और बनी इस्माइल अगर रिपेंटेंस के बाद मतलब ये कि अपनी ईमानी हालत को बदलते हैं, तो अल्लाह ताला उनको जमीन पे गलबा भी देगा और उनके मतलब ये कि उनकी हालत बेहतर करेगा। लेकिन जो हम जैसे लोग हैं, जैसे अजमी लोग हैं, और वो अगर अपनी ईमानी और अखलाकी हालत मतलब बतौर कौम ठीक करेंगे, तो उनको क्या मतलब उनको तो ऐसा कोई चीज नहीं है ना वादा।
So you see, as far as people who are not the Ishmaelites are concerned, they are considered as they're, of course, when they accept faith, they'll not become Ishmaelites per se, but it's like being added to their group. So basically, the promise is with the Ishmaelites, but all those people who, help them in any way, or they have become part of them, will also be the recipients of the reward that the Ishmaelites will receive, because you see, they have now become part of them. So the promise is with the Ishmaelites, but if anyone joins the Ishmaelites, they will also receive those promises. But primarily, it is the Ishmaelites who must behave and who must, regain their position of their covenant, in which they have to obey that covenant. So anyone who sides with them, they have to do it first, but all other people who side with them will naturally become a secondary recipient of all those rewards.
और ये जो बनी इसराइल थे, ये सैमुएल नबी की मौजूदगी में कह रहे थे कि कोई एक बादशाह मुकर्रर करें। तो क्या नबी की मौजूदगी में उनको उसकी जरूरत थी, या वो जबरदस्ती कह रहे थे? जैसे आज हमारी अक़वाम या उम्मत मुस्लिमा, वो भी यही चाह रहे होते हैं कि कोई एक मसीहा आए जो सुधार दे और संवार दे। तो क्या ये सभी की शुरू से यही आदत है कि खुद से कुछ नहीं, अखलाकी तौर पे हालत बेहतर करनी, बस कोई एक मुकर्रर हो जाए तो बस वही सब कुछ ठीक कर दे?
So as you can see from a certain Bible passage that I read, they said that because all other nations of the world have kings, so we would also like to have a king. So they did not regard their prophet to be king. And they said that they want a king who should have that worldly grandeur and glory the way other kings have. So there were several other dynasties of kings which were adjacent to their own territory, and they were enamored by them. They were inspired by them. And it was just this worldly glamour that made them awe-inspired and awe-stricken that they should also have a king like him. And look, the answer of God is that, well, I'm your king, I'm there for you. But they insisted that we want a king in physical form. So basically, it's out of following other nations that were around them who had kings.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. Akram Bhatti Saab, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Walaikum assalam.
Madam, I have two questions. I will ask one now and one second one when you give me a chance again.
You can go with both right now.
Okay. My first question is that I didn't quite understand what forced Palestinian to send the ark on the box and ark on its way to what forced them?
So this is it seems that the appointment of Talut or Saul, as the Bible calls him, was the reason, because this was the time that now they started to regain their lost glory by honoring the covenant of God. They had started to become strong, and these people who were, of course, living adjacent, they saw that now they are rising once again. So it does seem that basically it was that fear and that cowardice which already was in them. But when they saw Talut, if you study his story, Saul's story in the Bible, you'll know that he was a very grand person. As the Quran has already pointed out, that he was a person who had a very tall physique. He was a very impressive person. And the way that he had gone about in the era of Samuel, the prophet, in reforming the Israelites and in trying to make them a nation once again, this was something that created a lot of awe in the hearts of the Philistines, and they just thought that, well, the only way to evade this would be that they return their ark and just make peace with him.
So just to make peace with them, and in other words, they accepted their defeat.
Right.
Okay. Thank you. And second question is, I don't know if this related to this topic. I'm always wondering when there's Israelites, they stayed in those desert for 40 years. How did they, how did they achieve all the things that you, as in a life you need, like right from food to housing and to the garments and everything else. We need hundreds of things to survive for 40 years. There was a couple of generations probably.
So remember, they were actually they were honored by God. They were, as the Quran has enumerated at a number of places, food was given in the form of man and salwa. We know that the clouds would actually shadow over them so that they would be shielded from heat. And there were a number of other things. If you read the Bible, you'll find out during their wandering in the desert how the Almighty actually looked after them. So all the things that they needed for their survival in that desert for 40 years was given to them. And this was actually the reason that a whole new generation flourished in those 40 years. And then we know that after Moses had passed away, Joshua, his successor, in his leadership, they were able to invade Canaan and occupy it. So this was something of a divine help as well. It's not just that they did it themselves.
No, because the Mansar was mentioned, nothing else is mentioned. About you need hundreds of things.
I mean, if you would like to know more details, you just read the book of Exodus in the Old Testament, and you'll see how they were helped in many ways.
Okay, good. I have I will read that. I have the Bible. Thank you, sir. Jazakallah. Thank you,
Imran, please go ahead.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Shehzad. Actually, this is one of the questions I wanted to ask. That we know Joshua or Yusha bin Nun, he captured the Palestine because they were able to enter the new generation, and because at the time Philistines were there and they were driven out. So my question is, how long after that did the Philistine recapture the Palestine area, and then? So basically, how long after Joshua did Prophet Samuel came into power or became the prophet? And
so you see, we know that Prophet Samuel lived around 1,000 years BC.
Okay.
And you can calculate from that. And Moses was around 1500 BC.
1500, yeah.
Yeah. So it was somewhere in between. So if you look at the lives of the prophets, they were longish lives. But it should be somewhere between 1200 BC, I suppose, and 1300 BC.
No, that makes sense.
It's difficult to give the exact time, but it's somewhere between that time.
So that's good, very good. Thank you very much. That's very helpful. But my question is: so initially, the Israelites had driven the Philistines out under the reign of Prophet Joshua, right? And then the Philistine had recaptured the land, and that's
not all land. part
Okay.
of the land. So you see,
I see.
it's not that they had captured the complete land. This is part of that territory that they had driven them out from, and it was a big territory. But I mean, they were still there. But ultimately, it was in his era of Samuel that they were able to redo it. Otherwise, in his own era, just before that, major part of their territory had been taken away.
Mhm. I see. I see. Okay, so that's when Samuel and then the Daud or David comes, and then he got
Right,
crowned, and
right,
Solomon. So
right.
that's the golden era starts after this fight when they took over. Okay, thank you very much. Jazakumullah khairan.
Bismillah Tirmizi Ahmed, please go ahead.
So, Dr. Saleem, my question is when Abraham settled the Israelites in Canaan and then the Egyptians took them as slaves, now they're coming back, of course, we see with Moses and they're staying in the desert and then the coming of Samuel. So, the Philistines, who are the Philistines then? Because if the Egyptians had taken the Israelites back as slaves, so who are these people, Philistines, who are living in Philistines, and who are we referring to?
Because they were the people who, after that, when once they had been captured, I mean, they were taken away. It's not that the land of Canaan was left totally devoid of people. So there were neighboring people who came into that land, and they once again started to settle there, and
Okay.
they were called the Philistines. Yeah.
Okay.
So you see, this is one whole branch of Abraham's progeny, and we know that the people who were in the times of Joseph, when there was a severe famine, that they had to vacate that area. But you see, vacation doesn't mean that it remained vacated all through. There were I suppose. I mean, I'm not exactly sure, but I do suppose it was other adjacent nations who then came to occupy the land of Palestine.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. I had a question myself. So why does Allah not mention Nabi Shamil alayhi salam's name? He keeps on saying the Nabi lahum or Nabihim.
You see, this is something which the Quran does very often. It's not just in this case, but if you read the Quran anywhere in which there is some historical episode under discussion, it leaves out so many names, details, because you see, the Quran is not a book which was revealed in isolation. It had a background, established history was traveling with it, and people knew what it was discussing. So it was like a redundant thing that if the Quran would point out certain things, because people were well aware of all this history. So when it said their prophet, وَقَالَ لَهُمْ نَبِيُّهُمْ, everyone knew that their prophet at that in particular time was only Samuel who was present. So it was something of a well-known thing, and the people of the book also knew this. And as I said, this is a very, very, I mean, it's a very common feature of the Quran. It's not just here. If you look at all the historical episodes, it leaves out some of the major names at times. But it's not that it's missing out on those names. It's only that those names are already known. And it's like an extra detail which the Quran often does not partake on.
So does Allah want us to supplement the Quran with the previous books, like as?
Of course, yes.
Okay.
You see, you can clearly see that if you don't read the Bible, especially in this particular passage that we are studying today, although the Quran has made its point, but you see a number of details would evade us. That what happened, who are these people, and when the Quran says Alam tara ilal lazina, and it says Hum ulufun wa hazar al maut, Alam tara ilal lazina. So it's like referring to a part of history and creating that question in your mind that, well, who are these people and why are the Ishmaelites being asked to draw a lesson from them, and what exactly is the thing that they did so in a very right way that these Ishmaelites are being asked to follow them. So these are like supplementary details which, when known to us, they make us complete a picture. But it's not that if you don't know these details that the lesson that you can draw from these verses would be incomplete. It's only that more color would be added to it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. That was it for all the questions for now.
Okay, so let's go on to the next part. فَلَمَّا فَصَلَ طَالُوتُ بِالْجُنُودِ قَالَ إِنَّ اللَّهَ مُبْتَلِيكُمْ بِنَهَرٍ فَمَنْ شَرِبَ مِنْهُ فَلَيْسَ مِنِّي وَمَنْ لَمْ يَطْعَمْهُ فَإِنَّهُ مِنِّي إِلَّا مَنِ اغْتَرَفَ غُرْفَةً بِيَدِهِ فَشَرِبُوا مِنْهُ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا مِنْهُمْ فَلَمَّا جَاوَزَهُ هُوَ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مَعَهُ قَالُوا لَا طَاقَةَ لَنَا الْيَوْمَ بِجَالُوتَ وَجُنُودِهِ قال الذين يظنون أنهم ملاقو ربهم أنهم ملاقو الله كم من فئة قليلة غلبت فئة كثيرة. Then, after becoming the king of the Israelites, when Talut marched out with his army, he told people, God has decided to put you to test through a rivulet. The test will be that he who drinks from it shall not remain my companion, and he who would not drink anything from this rivulet shall be my companion, except if someone tastes a palmful, he may. So this is a test that we can see. It's not mentioned in the Bible the way the Quran is mentioned. The Bible mentions another test, but you see, when Talut went out for the war and for that battle, he wanted to check whether he had true followers, sincere people who would fight at his command. And so he said that, well, people, if you are going to be tested, and this rivulet, this small river, you are not going to drink any water from it, and anyone who does so, except if he drinks a very palmful or very, very, very meager amount from it, then that is fine. But if you start drinking, then that person will not belong to my battalion. And as the Quran says, فَشَرَبُوا مِنْهُ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا مِنْهُمْ. But it so happened that except a few of them, all drank from that rivulet. So they did not even listen to him, and they just drank like anything. So then when Saul crossed the rivulet, and those of his companions also who had adhered to their faith and saw the armies, then those who had failed the test said, we are not in a position to combat Goliath and his warriors today. So this is how one of the things which is mentioned in the Bible is that the campaign was to combat the Philistines, who at that time were led by Goliath. So this is the same Goliath. You might have seen the movie in which we have David and Goliath fighting each other. And of course, this is the Quranic story. It's also a biblical story. So Goliath was basically a general of the Philistines. And so Talut fought with him. And the Quran has actually called Goliath as Jalut. So in the Bible, we have the word Goliath. For the same person, we have the word Jalut in the book of Samuel. So let me just also cite for you the book of Samuel here, in which you'll see that how this war actually took place. So it says, now the Philistines gathered their forces for war and assembled at Sukkah in Judah. They pitched camp at Ephes Zimim between Sukkah and Izeh. So these are all places, and these are all biblical places in that area. Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah and drew up their battle line to meet the Philistines. The Philistines occupied one hill and the Israelites another, with the valley between them. So this is the war setting that you can clearly see. That had now become clear that the camps were pitched against one another. We see that one hill was occupied by the Philistines and the other hill was occupied by the Israelites. So you can see that one of the words which the Quran has said is, or cited here, is that you can see from the previous verse that when they met each other, remember they were outnumbered, but the brave people among them, they said, the people who were weak and faint-hearted, they said that we do not have any, we cannot fight Jalut, we cannot fight Goliath because he has a huge army. But the people who were bestowed with faith, their words were, we are not, the people who were had lost their own courage, they said, we are not in a position to combat Goliath and his warriors today. But the other people were, and they said, at this, those of them who believed that they have to meet God cried out. Now, this is another part that I'm just going to first read, the Arabic verse, which says, Kam min fi'atin qalilatin ghalabat fi'atan kasira bi'iznillah wallahu ma'as sabirin. So, those of them who believed that they have to meet God cried out, rest assured, because at many an instance a small group has, by God's grace, vanquished mighty groups, and God is with those who endure with fortitude. So, وَلَمَّا بَرَزُوا لِجَالُوتَ وَجُنُودِهِ قَالُوا رَبَّنَا أَفْرِغْ عَلَيْنَا صَبْرًا وَثَبِّتْ أَقْدَامَنَا وَانْصُرْنَا عَلَى الْقَوْمِ الْكَافِرِينَ. And it was these true Muslims who, when encountered Goliath and his warriors, prayed, Lord, bless us with perseverance, make us firm of foot, and make us prevail over these disbelievers. So these are the words who were said, because if a person dying for the cause of God, if dying is dearer to him than living, then we know that such a person, because of the fact that he believes death will not end his life, he will be granted real life, and he would meet the Almighty. So we know that Jonathan was the son of Talut. Jonathan was the son of Saul. And it is in all probability that he spoke these words, which have been cited here by the Quran, that there are many instances there in which a small group is able to conquer a larger group. So it seems from the Bible that these words were uttered by Jonathan, who was the son of Saul. And we see these words being cited once again in the book of Samuel 1, chapter 14 and verse 6. It says, Jonathan said to his young armor bearer, come, let us go over the outposts of those uncircumcised fellows. Perhaps the Lord will act in our behalf. Nothing can hinder the Lord from saving, whether by many or by few. So basically, it was Jonathan who said to these words, that as far as people are concerned, that at times they are meager in resources, but success actually comes from God's command. And so these are the words that we know were uttered. And we also know that in those times, all those who were gathered there, there were people who could not save themselves simply because it was God's command that even if a small group is able to challenge a larger group, because they adhere to God's covenant, then God extraordinarily helps them. So we know that from the book of Samuel, once again, Samuel 1, chapter 17, and this is verse 47, it says, all those gathered will know that it is not by the sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into your hands. So what a beautiful thing he has uttered here. He said that, well, you don't win by the sword or by the spear, because that is just a means of your fighting. It's basically the help of your Lord which makes you win. And that is how the Quran has actually referred to the faith of these believers. So the Quran says that Walamma barazu li Jalut. So we have already studied these words. It says that rest assured that at many instances a small group has by God's grace vanquished mighty groups. So these are the words spoken by Jonathan. And God is with those who endure with fortitude. So وَلَمَّا بَرَزُوا لِجَالُوتَ وَجُنُودِهِ قَالُوا رَبَّنَا أَفْرِغْ عَلَيْنَا صَبْرًا وَثَبِّتْ أَقْدَامَنَا وَانصُرْنَا عَلَى الْقَوْمِ الْكَافِرِينَ. And it was these true Muslims who, when encountered Goliath and his warriors, prayed, Lord, bless us with perseverance, make us firm of foot, and make us prevail over these disbelievers. فَهَزَمُوهُمْ بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ وَقَتَلَ دَاوُودُ جَالُوتَ وَآتَاهُ اللَّهُ الْمُلْكَ وَالْحِكْمَةَ وَعَلَّمَهُ مِمَّا يَشَاءُ ولولا دفع الله الناس بعضهم ببعض لفسدت الأرض ولكن الله ذو فضل على العالمين. So now we have the next part of the battle, and it says that thus their prayer was accepted. Remember, the prayer that they said was ربنا أفرغ علينا صبرا وثبت أقدامنا. Oh God, give us that perseverance, bless us with steadfastness so that we can conquer our enemy. So this prayer was accepted. And the Quran says, for hazamuhum bi'iznillah, that they decimated them, they destroyed them. And at God's directive, they routed those enemies of theirs. And David slew Goliath. And God bestowed on him sovereignty and wisdom and taught him what he wants to teach such people of his. And in reality, had God not driven away one by the other, the earth would have been filled with anarchy. But in this manner, he has driven away people because God is gracious to the dwellers of this world. So, as we know that basically David, or the prophet David, and the King David later on, he was a general. He was a soldier, in fact, from the army, and he basically killed Goliath, who was he was a general from the Philistines, from Saul's army or Talut's army. It was David who challenged him. And we have very graphic details of the war which took place in the Bible. You can look it up and you can see how David actually challenged Goliath and he slew him, even though Goliath was much more stronger than him. But then, as the Quran says, لَوْلَا دَفْعُ اللَّهِ النَّاسَ بَعْضُهُمْ بِبَعْضٍ. So this is how the Quran, actually portrays that at times the fasad, as the Quran uses the word, the disorder, the anarchy which is caused in this earth, this is done away with. This is the way God resolves this anarchy, is that he sends people of his own, and they are able to restore peace and subsistence for people on this earth. So this is a part of the history of the Israelites, which was recounted basically to the Ishmaelites. And we have seen from the Bible how clearly these verses corroborate the Quran, and how the Quran actually at certain instances does correct the Bible as well. But the thing is that in order to draw this inspiration, this was an incident which was well known to the Ishmaelites. They knew that this was their own the history of their predecessors, and how very few people. So remember, the lesson to be drawn is that it was a number of the enemy outnumbered them. So it was there in vast numbers, and there were very few people who passed the test of Talut, and most of them drank from that rivulet. And this actually was a big eye opener for Talut, and he understood that he didn't have many people whom he could count on. But then Jonathan, who was the son of Talut, he said that, well, at times when we are blessed with this faith and we know we are fighting for the will of God, and we are strong in faith, then at many occasions, kam min fiatin qalilatin ghalabat fiatan kathira. And on many occasions, a small group overcomes a larger group. So this was a message to the Muslims or the Ishmaelites, that if you are small in number, you don't get frustrated, because this is precisely what happened to the Israelites, that they were small in number, but they stuck to their faith and their covenant, and God helped them, and he helped them in a tremendous way. So in a similar way, they would also be helped. So you see how the Almighty draws these parallels from past history, and something here is that we know of is something that we have to understand, that this history was also well known to the Ishmaelites. And as someone just asked, that is precisely why some of the details were not given in full, because it was a well-known part of their history. And then it says, تلك آيات الله نتلوها عليك بالحق وإنك لمن المرسلين. These are the revelations of God which we are reciting to you in all truth, and doubtless you are among God's messengers. So you see, this is one of the styles, or I would say a feature of the Quran, that whenever an incident from the Bible is cited in the Quran, at times it corrects it, at times it modifies it, and at times it corroborates it. And it says that, well, this is a big proof of the fact that you are from amongst those whom God has sent, because you are now giving the true picture of the incident which was recorded in a previous scripture in a distorted way. And this is a sign that you are a messenger of God, because only God could have corrected this incident and portrayed it in the way that portrays the right situation. So this in itself is an argument in favor of his prophethood. And you'll see this verse or verses which are similar to it being cited all over the Quran whenever the Quran corrects an episode from the Bible, and it says that, well, you could have only done that because you are the recipient of God's knowledge, and from that knowledge you're able to give the true account of the incident instead of the distorted one that might come before you from the previous scriptures. Right. تلك الرسل فضلنا بعدهم على بعد منهم من كلم الله ورفع بعدهم درجات وآتينا عيسى ابن مريم البينات وأيدناه بروح القدس ولو شاء الله ما اقتتل الذين من بعدهم من بعد ما جاءتهم البينات ولكن اختلفوا فمنهم من آمن ومنهم من كفر ولو شاء الله ما اقتتلوا ولكن الله يفعل ما يريد. The Israelites also know this, but do not accept it, because among these messengers we have exalted some above the others, such that to some God spoke directly, and others he raised to a lofty status in some other capacity. And at the end we gave Jesus, son of Mary, extremely manifest signs and helped him through the Holy Spirit. Consequently, it was because of this relative superiority of one messenger to the other that the followers of one messenger rejected the other. And if God wanted, these who succeeded the messengers would not have fought against one another after overtly manifest arguments had become evident to them. But God did not want to force people to the right path. Hence, they disagreed among themselves. Thus, some among them professed faith in these messengers, and some rejected them. They are rejecting you, O Prophet, for the same reasons as well. And had God wanted, they would never have fought against one another. but God, according to his wisdom, does what he pleases. So once again, you see, once that incident has been finished, the Quran says that this is how the correction has takes place. That at times the Almighty, He corrects this incident and divulges the true form of that incident through a prophet of God. But the Quran has also said that because of the fact that people have prejudice against their own prophet, so they would not believe a correction made by a future prophet, or they would indulge in extreme or absolute superiority of their own prophet, and they would not realize that God has not given absolute superiority to any prophet. Any prophet. It's only relative superiority, and that is in a certain part or a certain area. A particular prophet might have a particular trait that the other prophet might not have. So the example that is given here, for example, is the example of Moses. So he conversed with God, and the only prophet who conversed with God was Moses. And Jesus, we know, was helped by the Holy Spirit, and the help here, of course, means that he was able to raise the dead to life. He cured the lepers. He had other miracles as well, and these were all given to him because, being the last prophet of God, of the Israelites of God. I mean, of course, he was sent as the last prophet among the Israelites, and his purpose was to awaken the Israelites from their slumber. And after 2,000 years of prophets being spent to them, one after the other, they had kept on this acceptance and rejection, and a major part of their tenure ended up in rejection. So he was sent for the last time as the last prophet, and he was given these profound miracles so that he could awaken them. But we know what happened, and they tried to even crucify him. So the Quran basically tells us that these relative superiority matters should not be a cause of making one nation boast his prophet or its prophet in a way that you are able to undermine other prophets of God. These are all prophets of God who have their particular, I would say, traits, and these traits are not something which should be a means of a superiority. They are basically traits given to each prophet according to the circumstances that he would encounter, and we know that God does not force people to come to the truth. فَلَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ مَقْتَتَلَ الَّذِينَ مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا جَاءَتْهُمُ الْبَيِّنَاتُ, which means that had God wanted, these people would not have fought each other in spite of these clear signs that had come to them. But God's way is not that he forces people to accept the truth. He gives them the choice to accept the truth. And then the Quran says, وَلَكِنِ اخْتَلَفُوا. So when this choice was given to them, they did differ. So for minhum man amana wa minhum man kafar. So there were people who professed faith, and there were people who differed and did not profess faith. And as a result, now also it's like relating that past incident to the present. So the Israelites, the way that incident is narrated to the Muslims or the believers, now these believers are being told that if this is something that has happened in the history of the Israelites and which you can draw inspiration from, it's going to happen again. And it has happened again, in fact, because now that the Prophet has come, once again, there are people who are accepting him and there are people who are rejecting him. So, وَلَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ مَقْتَتَلُوا. Had God wanted, they would not have fought with one another. وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَفْعَلُ مَا يُرِيدُ. But God does what he wants, which means that he gives them the choice to do what they think is right. So if they fight with one another, then it is basically because of their own prejudice, because of their own jealousy. So before we now move on to the next part of this section, so if you have any questions until now, please raise them.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. There's a question in the chat that asks, is Prophet Samuel ever mentioned in the Quran?
So not mentioned by name. He's mentioned in form of an insinuation. We just read that insinuation. It says, قَالَ لَهُمْ نَبِيُّهُمْ. So their prophet said to them. So the name is not mentioned, but we know, I mean, Samuel is the person, is the prophet who is under discussion.
Thank you. Bismillah Tirmizi Ahmed, please go ahead.
So, Dr. Saleem, my question to you is that Abraham was 4,000 years ago, Moses 3,500 years ago, Samuel 3,000 years ago, Jesus 2,000 years ago. So it almost seems that Allah gave the Israelites a chance for almost 2,000 years, and they did not take it. So my question to you is, Muslims now, for the past 1,500 years since the prophets come, we seem to have completely gone off track. We are completely divided. Is it our reckoning right now, the way it seems, with all the Muslims, the plight that we're in? Is it possible, even though we're not the munafiqs, because that is just probably from that time, but people say they believe in the Prophet, but nobody's willing to, actually follow the Quran, or, they twist it according to the way they want. What is your take on it?
So you see, I mean, my take is not as important as what the Quran itself has said. The Quran says that, you see, for the progeny of Abraham, the law is that they'll be punished in this world and they'll be rewarded in this world. So they'll be punished if they fail to abide by God's covenant. And this promise is with both branches of Abraham. So one of them was the Israelites, who have fulfilled, they've gone over their term and they are now finished. And now the same reckoning is being faced by Ishmaelites. So today, the Ishmaelites are subdued, and it's exactly in accordance with the law which God has for the progeny of Abraham, that because of the fact that they are not abiding by their covenant, that now they feel they find themselves subdued before other nations of the world. So basically, it's like a tit for tat thing. God says, "In uttum ordinavi." I mean, if you return to what you should do, I'll return my favor as well. So basically, for the progeny of Abraham, it's a simple thing that you have to pass that test. You have to abide by that covenant, and once you do so, God will make you superior, not through any fight or through any battle that you need to fight, but through the circumstances that He'll create on the globe. So all that they need to do is establish truth and justice in their own selves. And if they are not doing this, God says, "You shall definitely be punished." So there could be other nations whose reckoning could be left to the hereafter. But for the Ishmaelites and the Israelites, or the progeny of Abraham, they have to face this reckoning in this world. And this reckoning, as I said, it goes both ways. That if they fare well, they'll be given the leadership of the nations of the world. And if they don't fare well, they'll be subdued before them. And precisely this is what is happening. So today, if the Ishmaelites are being subdued and we find them to be at their decadent state, it's because of their own doing, and it's God's promise with them that if they rise, He shall make them rise once again.
So basically, just because we don't have another prophet coming, since Hazur is the last prophet, but our reckoning can be, as Muslims, we will not get away with it. We will be accountable in this world before the end of the world.
This accountability is for the Ishmaelites. Remember, Muslims, that's a wider term. Ishmaelites, for them, is this reckoning which is going on today. Basically, the progeny of Abraham is the recipient of this punishment, and the covenant of God was with them. So remember, with the Israelites, the situation was that a number of prophets came to them. So it was not just the four that you enumerated. Basically, one after the other. If you look at the book of, the book of prophets in the Bible, you'll see how one prophet would go and he would baptize the next one and say that I'm handing over my baton to the next one and to the next one. So it was like one after the other. And that is why the Quran says that their reckoning is going to be tough, because it's not just that prophets would come to them in gaps. They came to them one after the other in succession, and Jesus was the last of them. So from Moses to Jesus, if you just start counting, there was hardly a time when there was not a prophet amongst them. But this was not the case with the Ishmaelites, because of the fact that Ishmaelites, they were the recipients of the last book of God, which was to be preserved. So it's like effectively the book of God taking the place of the prophet himself, or the last prophet himself, because now the word of God is preserved. So it's like that book carrying on with that work, and now people being told that now you have this manifesto with you. If you adhere to it, you'll find pleasure with God, and if you don't, you'll be beaten in this world, which means, of course, that you'll be subdued by other nations. And this is exactly what is happening.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. We have a question in the chat that asks, is Ruh al-Quds or Ruh al-Amin always referring to Jibreel
Right. Correct.
Okay. Shabnam, please go ahead.
थैंक यू सर मैं थोड़ी आपने भी ये मेंशन किया बनी इस्माइल के बारे में सर ये तो प्रोबेबली ज्यादा अमाउंट में तो ये अरब में है सऊदी अरब में है तो सर वो तो एक लाइफ गुजार रहे हैं वो तो सबड्यूड नहीं है दे हैव लॉट्स ऑफ वेल्थ और मिनरल्स एटसेट्रा और वो अपेरेंटली तो गफलत में है सबड्यूड तो नहीं है दे आर एंजॉयिंग देयर लाइफ देमसेल्फ
No, actually, I mean, you don't subdued means that they I mean, they are not the leaders of the world, and it's not just the Arab nations. It's not just Saudi Arabia that we're talking of. You find Jordan, you find Morocco, and these are some of the Hashemite kingdoms in which the Bani Ishmael are scattered. So you see, they are not at one place. They're not just at one place. They are not just in the Arabian Peninsula. They are scattered in some of the Gulf countries. They are found in Jordan. They are found in Morocco and some of the other countries. So it's in their collectivity because of the fact they are not concentrated in one country. They are found in various countries. And in the case of the Arabs also, if you look at their look at their history and the way they are behaving now, I mean, they are they are subjugated to the West. So they are basically a vessel of the West. They are an ally to the United States, if you look at that. And if they are not, they don't seem to be subjugated because of the fact that basically they have made friends with an enemy. And the only reason for their survival or for their uplift is that they seem to be their ally. So I think you should not be mistaken that this comfortable lifestyle is not what the Quran is talking about. The Quran is saying that if you look about your own selves and if you believe in God and you have your truth and justice prevail amongst yourselves, then the Ishmaelites as a collectivity would be the leader of the rest of mankind. You see, this is the promise. To have a good life in your own self is just one part of it. And again, as I said, that's another relative thing because you don't have that thing in actual form. So basically, the promise is that if Ishmaelites would adhere to God's word, they will be leaders of all mankind, the rest of mankind. And this we know is not happening.
सर लेकिन वो सफर तो नहीं करे ना पनिशमेंट के, ऐसी उन्हें परवाह नहीं है, वो अपने मस्त है अपने किंगडम को लेकर, वो तो दे आर नॉट वरीड एट ऑल, दे आर नॉट फीलिंग कि वो पनिश हो रहे हैं, वो फ्रेंड्स बना के बैठ.
I mean, if you, as I said, this is just one part. I mean, they are not all the Ishmaelites, and this is not what the Quran has said. Ishmaelites, they are scattered in other countries as well. And as far as these Arabs are concerned, I mean, it's not that the Quran is not talking about any internal comfort that a country might have. They could have that comfort. So the Quran is not talking about a comfort position. It is telling us that the promise is that they will prevail over all other nations. So the promise is not, I mean, the subjugation does not mean that they would not be comfortable. The subjugation means that they will never be able to lead the rest of mankind. This leadership promise is something which the Quran has made, and this we can clearly see is not happening.
Right, sir. Sir, may I ask another question, Mariam?
Yeah, please go ahead.
सर, ये जो आप हिस्टोरिकल एक्सेप्ट्स पढ़ते हैं, जो चीजें पढ़ते हैं आप बाइबल से, सर ये ओल्ड और न्यू टेस्टामेंट तो नहीं है, वो तो रिवील की गई थी. ये ह्यूमन एफर्ट है जो उसमें हिस्टोरिकल बातें.
So I mean, this part of Old Testament. So Old Testament has a whole chapter on the books of the prophets. So these minor prophets, as we call them, Samuel, and we have Hizkiel, we have Jeremiah, we have so many of the prophets. They had their own scriptures, and they are, to some extent, I mean, part of them is found in the whole of the Bible. But as I said, it's part of the Old Testament.
Sir, Old Testament to
as I said, Old Testament is just not a collection which was revealed to Moses. I mean, that is what we call the Pentateuch. So the Pentateuch are the first 5 books of the Bible. They are the ones that were revealed to Moses. So the Old Testament is a vaster majority of scriptures.
सर ये जो किया गया है इसको, ये ह्यूमन वर्क है ना जो उसको कलेक्ट करके ये
compilation. Yes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Saleem. We have questions in the chat. So this one is a bit longer, but it talks about the kingship and how the Quran mentions this incident but doesn't explicitly condemn kingship. So doesn't it leave room for Muslims to choose someone as king even though the Bible talks against it?
So remember that this is this is an area of history of the Israelites, and this is they talking to God and God telling them that this is not what they should do, and if they do so, they'll just be, they will push to certain other limits, and they're not listening to him. I mean, this is not a situation that can be compared in any way to the Quranic directive of Amruhum Shura Bainahum, or the fact that God wants people to have their own opinion when they choose their leader. This is divine appointment by God himself of a leader, and that at their own demand. So this is an era in which, there was monarchy, and there were people living under kingships, and precisely for this reason, actually, they said that because the rest of the world has kings, they would also like a king. So this is how the Quran is actually treating a particular incident of history. It's not recommending anything. The recommendation as a Sharia is something which it has made elsewhere. Here it is just quoting something that happened in history, and God, just out of his own affection, listened to them in order to prove his own point that if they would like to live under a king, then they would ultimately be humiliated by him. And this is precisely what happened. But because initially they did not listen to him, God said, okay, you can have your own choice and you'll learn and listen from that.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. Javed Ishrat, please go ahead.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम। सबसे पहले तो जो कुछ आप कर रहे हैं और जो आपने किया उसकी मुबारकबाद आपको देते हैं, और हम समझते हैं कि जावेद अहमद गामदी साहब इस मौजूदा अहद के सबसे बड़े स्कॉलर उनको कहा जा सकता है। इसमें जो जो डिस्कशन अभी हो रही थी, जैसे जावेद अहमद गामदी साहब के हमने काफी सब चीज हम सुनते हैं, पढ़ते हैं, देखते हैं, तो जैसे एक बात उन्होंने कही थी कि जैसे अमेरिकन हैं या यूरोपियंस हैं, अगर ये सब मुसलमान हो जाएं तो इस्लाम कुव्वत में आ जाएगा। जी जी।
I mean, we need to have questions that relate to our text at the moment. So if you want off-topic questions, we'll have time for that later on. But at the moment, we are just entertaining questions which relate to the passage that we have studied.
Okay, thank you so much. So, okay, no problem. It's right now the very short time, so I will talk to you later. No problem.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Everything is clear, alhamdulillah. And it's okay.
Thank you. Bismillah Tirmizi Ahmed, please go ahead.
So, Dr. Saleem, the lady before me asked that, you know, you mentioned to her that the Hashemites are spread in Jordan, Morocco, Saudi Arabia, and adjoining areas. Would the reckoning be just for the Hashemites or the Bani Ismail, as we specifically say, the tribe, or for all the Muslims? Because all the Muslims seem to be subservient right now as nations to the West. So
we have to understand that the promise of God is with the progeny of Abraham. Basically, the progeny of Abraham has to behave well. Once they behave well, anyone who adds to their total, who comes and joins them, would be a secondary recipient. But in the absence of the progeny of Abraham, if the rest of the believers or Muslims, they become righteous, the promise is basically not with them. So the promise is with the Ishmaelites, and anyone who joins the Ishmaelites, once the Ishmaelites behave well, will, of course, be receiving that reward of leadership. So basically, remember, this reckoning is of leadership and not being leader of the world. So this is like one thing. As far as sinning is concerned, as far as your other deeds are concerned, that is a separate reckoning, which will nevertheless take place on the day of judgment. This is a separate form. This is like the law of the Almighty regarding the progeny of Abraham, that they will be the leaders of this world currently, in this world, and they lead the rest of mankind. And if they don't follow God's covenant, other nations will lead them, and they will be vanquished before them. So basically, this is a promise of leadership. And a reckoning, of course, is something which is parallel to it, and that is going to take place in the hereafter as well.
So the Sayyids, basically the Sayyids, the people who call themselves Sayyids, the progeny.
You see, the word Sayyid is again misleading. The word Sayyid means the person who belongs to the Prophet's family. And we are not talking about the Prophet's family.
But wouldn't that be the progeny then?
Ishmaelites.
The Ishmaelites wasn't the Prophet descended from Ismail?
Of course he was. But you see, Sayyids and Ishmaelites are two different entities. So Sayyid was a person who would be called from within the family of the Prophet, the immediate family of the Prophet. It's not that everyone is going to become an immediate family of the Prophet.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. For the Ruh al-Quds, this is my question. You said that that's Jibreel alayhi salam in the Qur'an. Is the Holy Spirit also Gabriel in Christianity? Because in Christianity, from what I understand, he's an archangel.
Yeah. So you see, when they speak of the Holy Spirit, they speak of that Holy Spirit in their own context. And they regard it to be a part of Godhead. That is someone, he's part of Godhead. But you see, when it occurs in the Quran, wherever it occurs in the Quran, I'm talking about the Quran. So the Quran specifically uses the word Holy Spirit for Gabriel. And it uses it as a divine sanction or the divine help from the Almighty. You see, the words are وَأَيَّدْنَاهُ بِرُوحِ الْقُدُسِ, that we help them through the Holy Spirit. So this is like God saying that through his archangel, he was able to help them. So I'm talking about just the Quran. I mean, in the Bible, it has a different there are passages they might have a different connotation, but within the Quran, Ruhul Amin, Ruhul Qudus, Ar-Ruh, they all relate to Gabriel.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saleem. We have 15 minutes remaining, and I know you wanted to finish the last part.
Yeah. So just let's do this last part, and then we'll have some more time for questions, which can be off-topic questions.
Thank you.
So now we come back to the Quran, and you'll see that the topic of infaq is taken up afresh once again, because you see in between we had that incident from the era of the Israelites, and then the Almighty once again telling people that how at times by giving veneration to some prophet of God, people end up fighting with one another, and this has happened again when the prophet has come, and they would not like the last prophet to come from some other part of Abraham's progeny, and this jealousy has once again taken over them. And so once this topic has finished, we find the Quran going back to its original topic of infaq and jihad. Now infaq is taken up, and that is Ya ayyuhallazina amanu anfiqu mimma razaqnakum min qabli an ya'tiya yawmun la bay'un fihi wala khullatun wala shafa'a wal kafiruna humuz zalimun. Believers, leave them to themselves and spend of what we have given you for the cause of God, before that day arrives when there shall be no bargaining, neither shall friendship with someone be of use, nor shall any intercession be of avail. And in reality, the rejectors of that day are the ones who are unjust to their souls. So, this verse doesn't have any difficulty, and it says that the spending in charity is the thing that is going to save people. Of course, this is understood that they have faith in God, but then when the time comes for that charity to be spent, they are the ones who are vigilant, and they are the ones who know that it is their own deeds which are going to save them. And as the Quran says, that is the day in which no friendship will be of avail, no benefit will be gained from any friendship nor any intercession. So rest assured, as far as the believers are concerned, it's their own deeds which will account for their success, and they are not. The disbelievers are not in any way going to be given any success because of any intercession or any friendship with someone else. And with this introductory sentence, we now come to one of the greatest verses of the Quran, which actually glorifies and introduces the Almighty in a very, very specific light. And it goes like this: Allahu la ilaha illahu al hayyul qayyum la ta'khuzuhu sinatun wa la nawm lahu ma fis samawati wa ma fil ard man zal ladhi yashfa'u indahu illa bi izni ya'lamu ma bayna aydihim wa ma khalfahum wa la yuhituna bi shay'in min ilmihi illa bima sha'a wasi'a kursiyyuhu as-samawati wal ard wa la ya'uduhu hifzuhuma wa huwal aliyyul azim. On that day, people will have to deal with God only. God, there is no deity but He, the living, the sustainer. Neither slumber nor sleep overtakes Him. All that is in the heavens and the earth belongs to Him only. Who can intercede with Him for someone except by His permission? He knows all that lies before people and what is after them, and they cannot grasp any part of His knowledge except what He allows. His dominion prevails in the heavens and the earth, and their protection does not tire Him the slightest, and He is exalted, the glorious one. So this verse of the throne, or the Ayatul Kursi as we commonly know it, it's a glorious verse. I can feel, you can feel the words, the way they portray God, and the way that they describe that He is the person who is living, He is the person who makes other people live, and giving this aura about Him that He is ever vigilant. He's always there. There's not a time when He is not attentive to you. So He is not sleeping for a single nanosecond, because if people are told that, well, there's one small millisecond in which He's not aware or He's not available, that will be the time when people will make hay. So the Quran had to give this prescription that God, the sustainer, the person or the being who has brought you into existence and who sustains you, He is ever vigilant. And there is no one who can intercede for Him or before Him regarding other people. His knowledge is so complete that He knows what is in the past and He knows what is in the future. And whatever people know is because of the knowledge that He has given them. It says that La yuhituna bi shay'in min ilmihi illa bima sha, that they only know Prophet his knowledge, what he himself would try to reveal or divulge. And such is his knowledge that only he is able to divulge it, and only then you're able to know about it. And his dominion spreads on the heavens and the earth. Wasiya kursi, the word kursi, or the chair, as we know, is as a metaphor for expressing the fact that his dominion, his power, his sovereignty, it prevails on the heavens and the earth, and he protects them. And la yauduhu hifzahuma, he does not get tired while protecting them, because you see, to show vigilance for millions and billions of years and continue with that vigilance forever and forever, it's something that as human beings we just cannot imagine. But here is God. He says about himself that he protects his dominion. He's there, he's controlling it, and not a moment transpires when he is not vigilant about that dominion, and that everything is under his control, and that he does not get tired in any way in protecting it and controlling it. So with these words, we come to an end to today's discussion. So we end on verse 255 here, and the 10 minutes that remain, you have time to ask off-topic questions as well as any questions that might relate to this verse.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. Nugir 20, please go ahead.
Okay, Dr. Sir, my name is Abid. One off question from the lesson. Right. There is a group of people who consider that the Prophet Ibrahim asked pray that the imamat should be in my progeny. So that's why they are saying the God has finished the Nabuwa, the end of the Nabuwat, but the imamat which is prayed for is carry on. So what's your what you say about?
I think this verse has no bearing on the imamat for the group of people that we are talking of today. I mean, the imam is not referring to any religious imam. It's referring to the imam amongst the prophets of God as leaders. So the word imam is not referring to any religious leadership. It's actually referring to the overall, if I can use the word, political leadership, that you are like leaders of mankind. So Abraham was appointed as the leader of mankind, and this status was given to him at his request. I mean, not just his request. God said that because of the trials that you had gone through, we are now appointing you the leader of mankind. And when he said that, what about my followers? He said that, well, followers who would follow you would receive the same status. So, I mean, this is a very specific thing which the Quran is spoken of, and it relates to the progeny of Abraham. It does not relate to any sect of today or yesterday or the times of the Prophet himself, as people have started to argue about. This imamat does not relate to any other imamat except the fact that as rulers, as leaders of mankind, I mean, it's a leadership position bestowed to the followers of Abraham, and not just any religious leadership.
So that's why they are believing that the progeny Allah has given it, and that's why the imamat is continued. That's why they are taking that bit from that sentence. So I'm just confused about it.
I mean, as I said, that sentence has no relation to today's. People who call that they derive that imamat from that verse, because, as I said, that is something which was promised to Abraham's progeny, and it's like a collective leadership that was bestowed upon them, not the leadership of a single imam as they claim.
Shabnam, please go ahead.
थैंक यू मरियम सर मैंने एक दफ़ा गामदी साहब का कुछ सुना था जिसमें उन्होंने गालिबन कुरान के बारे में कुछ बताया था कि इसमें 70 to 80% जो है वो मोस्टली शिर्क की तरदीद है, इतने परसेंट उसमें शरीयत या लॉ है, या कुछ परसेंट इस तरह से उन्होंने कुछ स्टैटिस्टिक्स बताई थी. अगर आपके नो हाउ में हो तो काइंडली गाइड कर दें प्लीज.
Actually, these statistics are just rough estimations. What he probably did say once was that 2/3 of the Quran is revealed for the people, for the idolaters, and it was revealed mostly in Mecca because it was addressing the nation of the Prophet, and it dealt with the polytheists. So, a large part of the Quran deals with polytheism, and the rest of the Quran has a lot to say regarding people of the book. So, whenever it deals with the people who are in opposition to the message of God. So these are basically three entities or two entities. One are the people of the book, and the other is the idolaters. So the part of the Quran which relates to the idolaters is almost 2/3. And so it's not it's not an accurate statistic. All that it says is that basically people who are studying the Quran today for them, because of the fact that we think that the Quran has everything in it, it's like a universal book of God. So the background for a person is that when with this mindset he approaches the Quran, he gets disappointed because he doesn't find universal things being mentioned there, or so many other things that he might expect to have find there. But what he actually finds there is a discussion either with the idolaters, which are the polytheists, or with the people of the book. So this was a misconception that he was trying to dispel, that if you look at the Quran, that a major part of the Quran is either speaking to the idolaters, and when it speaks to the idolaters, of course, it would speak to them regarding their own beliefs. So if today people read it, they should read it in that historical perspective.
Right, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saleem. Javed, Ishrat, did you still want to ask her a question?
थैंक यू वेरी मच। जी, एक्चुअली जो बात इसमें चल रही थी अभी कि 2000 years about आफ्टर इब्राहिम अलैहिस्सलाम के बाद 2000 साल या उससे ज्यादा तक नबी आते रहे और रसूल भी उसमें आए। तो नबी सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम को भी ऑलमोस्ट इतना ही अरसा हो रहा है, तकरीबन 1500 years हो रहे हैं। तो इसकी वजह ये है कि हमारे पास जो किताब है या उनकी सुन्नत है वो इस कदर महफूज तरीके से हम तक आ चुकी है कि अब इसमें कोई तगय्युर नहीं आ सकता, इसमें कोई चीज नई ऐड नहीं हो सकती, ना इसमें से कोई चीज निकाली जा सकती है। तो शायद इस वजह से अब किसी नबी की जरूरत नहीं है। और जरूरी नहीं कि ये माफ कीजिएगा, जरूरी नहीं कि यही लोग इस्लाम के लीडर रहें। जैसे गामदी साहब ने फरमाया था कि अगर कोई भी कौम इस्लाम कबूल कर लेती है और कोई तरक्की याफ्ता कौम इस्लाम कबूल कर लेती है, तो इस्लाम एक कुव्वत दोबारा भी हासिल कर सकता है। और इस्लाम एक आलमगीर दावत है, वो किसी एक कौम के लिए नहीं है, इसमें कोई भी कौम इसमें आ सकती है। Am I right, sir?
Yes. आपका सवाल क्या है?
नहीं, सवाल इसमें ये गामदी साहब की जो बात थी, जो इसमें ये हो सकता है, ये जो इस बनी इस्माइल के बारे में खास तौर से कहा गया है, ये बनी इस्माइली इसको लीड करेंगे, क्या क़यामत तक सिर्फ यही लीड करेंगे या कोई और कौम भी इसको लीड कर
सकती है? That's a separate issue. You see, the promise with the progeny of Abraham relates to the promise which belongs to the people who are from his descendants. So not everyone is from his descendants today, and their own rise and fall will be governed by other principles of rise and fall. But this is a promise specifically made for the people of the progeny of Abraham. People who do not belong to the progeny of Abraham, for example, people who are not Semites, they are Japhites, or they are Hamites, as we know. The Prophet Noah had 2 more sons, and they belong to his progeny. So they will follow that general law of rise and fall of nations. And that is a separate thing, and that is like a parallel thing which can exist. We are specifically talking about the Semites, the Semitic race. And so Semitic race is the race from which Abraham was born. And this promise was made to his race, just his race. So there are other races besides him, besides his race, which are equally there, and for them the law is different.
Shiraz Ahmed, if you have a really quick question, go ahead.
I promise you it's a quick one. Thank you, sister. Assalamu alaikum, Shehzad Bhai. Shehzad Bhai, when Quran said to Prophet, when God said to Prophet Ibrahim, Jailuka lin-nasi imam, it was a leadership. Yes, that's what imamat means, but it was a religious leadership. My question is that Quran used it simply as an Arabic word. The word imam, as per my understanding, has never been used as a divine position in the entire Quran, unlike the word prophets or messengers, which are explained chapter after chapter as divine position. So is it true that the word imam has not been used as any divine position, but just as a simple
not a divine
Arabic
position?
word?
It's a political, and just as you use a simple word in any language, that you are the leader of mankind. So the word leader is used as the word imam. It's just a common Arabic word. It doesn't have any specific connotation.
Okay, Dr. Saleem, that was it for all the questions today. Inshallah, see you next week. And thank you so much for supplementing our studies along with Bible studies. That is highly appreciated. And thanks to all the participants who showed up today and asked great questions. Inshallah, see you all next week. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.